Hello everyone, this is a video for lesson 8.3, Types of Statistical Studies, and in this lesson you are going to be learning about sample surveys, observations, and experiments. Alright, so we're going to start this lesson with kind of an opening exercise. So you want to know what proportion of the population likes rock music. Now first of all, proportion is just what percent, okay? So you're going to carefully consider 3 different ways to conduct a study. What are the similarities and what are the differences? So some have advantages, some may have disadvantages. It really depends on the context, but let's get into this particular situation. So A says you could pick a random sample of people and ask them the question, do you like rock music? And record their answers. B, you could pick a random sample of people and follow them for a period of time, noting their music purchases both in stores and online. And then C, you could pick a random sample of people, separate them into groups, have each group listen to a different genre of music. Would you collect data on the people who display an emotional, you would collect data on the people who display an emotional response to the rock music. Okay, so after reading these 3, I could tell that there is immediately some similarities and there are definitely some differences. First of all, the similarities would be what you start with. You notice how it says pick a random sample in all 3 of them? See, that's really important when you're gathering data because you want your sample to be random, because if it's not random, you can't really infer anything about your data to the population. So kind of the whole point in statistics is when you do an experiment is that you have a random sample and therefore you can apply those results to the population. So random sample is very important. So that is the similar thing. But what's different? So this first one says you are asking people and you are recording the answers. Okay. The second one says that you follow them. Now it seems a little creepy, but I don't know. But you don't really interact with them at all. I guess that's the point. And then you just kind of write down, noting is the same thing. So you're just kind of recording what they purchase in stores and online. And then the third one is you actually interact with people and you do something to change the results. So you separate them into groups and then you have each group listen to a different genre of music. So the first one is you're asking and you're getting answers. That's how you get your data. The second one is that you're kind of watching them from afar and then collecting data. And the third one is you're actually trying to affect the results. So that's what it does, is it separates it into the 3 big groups, which are surveys, observations, and experiments. Okay, so now at this point in the video, I need you to pause the video and I need you to read the next 2 paragraphs, and then we're going to answer the question below. Go ahead and hit play when you're done reading. All right, so you learned a little bit about what's the difference between surveys, observations, and experiments. So let's classify the 3 studies above. So A, it says you're asking them the question. So that is definitely going to be a survey. And B, you are following them. You're just kind of observing. You're not interacting at all. So that is an observation. And then the last one is when you're going to conduct an experiment. So when you have any doubt in your mind if something is an experiment, as long as you have some kind of treatment, that's kind of a key word, you are applying some kind of a treatment. So the treatment in this case would be you asking them to listen to different types of music and then watch them react. In an observation, you would never interact with the people. You just collect data. So in an experiment, definitely has a treatment. So C is an experiment. Okay, so example 1 kind of exposes you to a typical survey, and I'm sure that you've taken surveys before. So this one would be asking people about salad, vegetable pizza, turkey sandwich, and raspberry tea. Basically, it's kind of a check the box saying either I like the salad, I don't like the salad, or I've never tried them. So that's just kind of a typical thing. You can have multiple choice questions. You can have, answer on a scale of 1 to 5, things like that. But survey questions can kind of go wrong. So if you look at this question right here, it says, what kind of computer do you own? First of all, not everybody is going to own a computer. Second of all, it may not fit into one of these two categories. So that is a terrible question. So how do you answer that question if you don't own a computer? You just don't answer it, I guess. So what they did is they fixed it a little bit, and it says if you answered yes, what type of computer is it? So they did fix it. So it makes a little bit more sense. We're going to skip the whole rewrite. I do want to tell you about this survey that went very wrong back in 1936. It was from the Literary Digest. It was a magazine, and they predicted that this person that I've not heard of, Alf Landon, they would beat incumbent President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. They predicted that he would win, and unfortunately, well, actually, I don't know. That's not unfortunate. Roosevelt won and an absolute landslide, absolutely decimated this other person. Well, what went wrong is that all of these questionnaires were sent to the prospective voters, but what happened is that the only people that responded were people that were wealthy. A lot of people didn't have time or didn't care to respond to the survey. So their sample that responded to the survey was not representative of the population. And that's why it's so important to have that random sample. And that sample has to represent your population. If not, it's not really going to match what the actual population thinks. Okay, so let's talk about observational studies. So an observational study, what it does is it records values, like it collects data, but it does not, absolutely does not attempt to influence the response. Okay, so for example, researchers investigated the link between the use of cell phones and brain cancer. There's two variables in the study. So one is the extent of cell phone usage, basically how long that they've used their cell phone. And the second is whether or not the person has cancer or brain cancer. So both variables were measured for a group of people. This is an observational study. You're never ever going to conduct an experiment on a study of this type. The reason why is because you don't ever want to purposely expose anybody to anything that's going to harm them. So if you think that a cell phone is going to give somebody brain cancer, you're not going to purposely do that. You're just going to sit back and observe people that already use cell phones. So here's the question. Why would studying any relationship between asbestos exposure and lung cancer be an observational study instead of being an experiment? So pause the video, think on that. So the reason why we wouldn't want to do that is because we're not going to purposely expose anyone to asbestos and give them lung cancer if we suspect of that happening. So this is absolutely why this is going to be an observational study instead of an experiment. Okay, so we're going to skip part B and we're going to go straight to C. And it says, suppose that an observational study establishes a link between asbestos exposure and lung cancer. Based on that finding, can we conclude that asbestos causes lung cancer? So the wording in that is very important in statistics. So when you say that it has a link between them, it basically means that there is some kind of pattern, okay? So a link is like a pattern. Sometimes we use something called a correlation. So that pattern could be linear, that pattern can be exponential, it can have like a curve to it. Like you just never know until you like graph the data and you can see it. So there's a pattern there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there is a cause and effect. So no, an observational study cannot establish cause. The only thing that can establish a cause and effect relationship is an experiment. And the reason why an experiment can do that is because you have a control group versus a treatment group. So you can compare the results between the two. It might just be like a happy coincidence that you have, the two. So, I mean, there can be I'll show you an example right now. So I will give you ice cream sales, and we're going to compare that to swimmers in the lake. So as you have more swimmers in the lake or the pool, your ice cream sales kind of generally go up. So does swimming really have anything to do with ice cream sales? Not really, because you have a lurking variable. And that lurking variable, guess what? That is the weather. So in general, as the weather gets warmer, that is what is causing the ice cream sales to go up, not the swimming. So you have to be really careful when observing things like that and making conclusions. There is absolutely a pattern or a correlation between the two, but not a cause and effect between swimming and ice cream sales. All right, we're going to skip that part. Let's go to an experiment. Okay, so an experiment will definitely try to influence the results. So what they're going to do is they're going to impose something called a treatment to see if there is an effect on one of the groups or some of the people, depending on, the experiment. So suppose that an observational study indicated that a certain type of tree did not have as much termite damage as the other trees. Okay. So research wondered if resin from the tree was toxic to the termites. They decided to do an experiment where they exposed some termites to the resin and others to plain water. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there for a second. So when they exposed the termites to the resin, that was the treatment. And when they gave plain water to the other ones, that was the control. So the control is basically no change whatsoever. This is your treatment over here. And what they do is they compare the treatment and the control to see if there is a significance difference between the two. So this is obviously going to be an experiment. So we know that it's an experiment because it's based on that treatment because they're exposing the termites to the resin. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video, read this study right here, and tell me if you think it's an experiment or not. And if you do think it's an experiment, you need to be able to tell me what that treatment is. Okay, so this experiment was a little bit different than the one before it. You actually have 3 different groups, but it is definitely an experiment. And if you think it's an experiment, then you can definitely say what the treatment is. And the treatment is the amount of light or the different types of light exposure. So one group had 24 hours of just pure light. The other one had 24 hours of dark. And then the other one kind of had it split 12 hours of light and dark. So I think the middle one would be the control. And the other 2 would be the treatment groups. I'm going to throw a new one in here, the response. So the response variable is what they are measuring. So if they're throwing the light at them in different rates, what are they recording? What are they trying to figure out? So they're recording the lengths of radish. All right, next up it says in an experiment, we have a random assignment of subject to treatments is done to create a comparable treatment group. Okay, so for example, let's say that a biologist wants to compare the effects of 2 different weed killers on a flower. She chooses 24 plants. Now, she applies the weed killer or the first weed killer to the healthiest plants, and then the second weed killer to the remaining 12 plants. Now, if she does that, she's not really going to tell if it's the actual weed killer that's killing the plants or if they were just going to die in that second group anyway. That's why random assignment is really important in an experiment. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how should the biologist go about randomly assigning the 12 plants for A and the other 12 plants for B. So since random assignment is important, what you can do is you can use a random number generator. So what you can do when you use that random number generator is you can have it pick a number between 1 and 24. So what you have to do is you have to make sure that you give each plant a number. And obviously it will be 1 to 24. And then when you use your random number generator, pick a number between 1 and 24. And then when you have 12 in that first group, Since they're randomly selected, you can put that in group A, and then you can have the rest in group B. That way, group A is randomly selected, and the rest of them is going to be randomly selected because they weren't selected, and it's going to be a lot more fair. And when she compares the two results, she'll be able to tell if there is a cause and effect between the actual weed killer and the life of the plant. Okay, one thing I definitely want to mention before we move on is an experiment can show cause and effect. Now, you don't know how to run the data to figure that out yet, but as long as you know it can establish cause and effect, we're good to go. All right, now it is your turn to practice. So it's going to ask you, first of all, if something is a survey, an observational study, or an experiment, and then you need to say why you chose that answer. And then the second part, if it is an observational study, then they want you to say what the population is. That's what we studied yesterday, or in the previous lesson. And then for an experiment, you're going to have to identify the treatment and then that response variable. The response is what you are measuring, okay? And then the treatment is what you're trying to apply to the group to cause some kind of change, okay? Go ahead and pause the video. Take your time, read the questions carefully, and then unpause the video and let's check your answers. All right, so if we look at situation A here, we have a study and they're trying to figure out whether boys are quicker at learning video games than girls. 20 randomly selected boys, 20 randomly selected girls, so they're placed in groups. They played a video game that they had never played before. Okay, so this is definitely not going to be a survey because they're not asking questions and gathering information that way. So it's either going to be an observation or an experiment. Well, I don't think this is going to qualify for an observation because the people doing the study had the groups play a video game that they hadn't played before. So they are applying a treatment. So this is an experiment. Okay, and if we think it's an experiment, we have to say the treatment group and the response variable. So the treatment would be playing a new video game. And what are they trying to measure? The level of expertise. And if you don't know what that means, how well you play the game. All right, B. As your statistics project, you collect data by posting 5 questions. Oop. So question and answer. I think this is going to be a survey. That one's pretty obvious. A professional sports team traded its best player. The local television station wanted to find out what the fans thought of the trade. So at the beginning of the evening news program, they asked viewers to call one number if they favored the trade and a different number if they opposed the trade. So they're asking people for their opinion. At the end of the news program, they announced that 53.7% favored the trade. All right, now is this the best design study? Probably not, but if they are asking and people are responding to that, this is considered a survey. Okay, part D. The local Department of Transportation is responsible for maintaining lane and edge liners for paved roads. There are 2 new paint products on the market. 20 stretches of road are identified. So what they did is they split it into 2 groups and they randomly assigned to 10 of the stretches paint B to the other 10. So you got paint A for the first 10 and paint B to the other 10. So they're going to compare the 2. So are they applying any kind of treatment? Absolutely they are. So this is going to be an experiment. And that experiment involves a treatment and a response variable. So the treatment is going to obviously be the type of paint. And what are they trying to measure? They're trying to measure how long the paint lasts. All right, in Part E, we've got a National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. They conduct studies on driver seatbelt use at a random selection of roadway sites in each state in the United States. So to determine the seatbelt usage has increased, they analyze data over 2 consecutive years. Okay, so they're not asking people questions, so it's not a survey. They're not applying a treatment, so it's not an experiment. So this is going to be an observational study. Now they probably collected data from videos and just some kind of data somewhere. So this is typically an observational study, and if you want it to be an observational study, we're going to identify the population of interest. So it says we got to, and you'll see the driver seatbelt use, so it will be driver's seatbelt use, and we can't stop there, on roadway states in each state in the United States. Okay, lots of context, but that is the population of interest. Okay, so if you read F, you actually wind up collecting information by asking a student about their teeth brushing habits. So this is definitely a survey. All right, in the next example, it says it's determining whether taking aspirin regularly helps to prevent heart attacks. So you've got a large group of male physicians of comparable health. They were randomly assigned to take an aspirin every second day or taking a placebo. So placebo is a word that describes like a medication that has absolutely no effect. It's like drinking water, okay? So this is going to be experiment, because they are purposely giving people aspirin to take. So that would be the treatment. And then the response variable is what they are measuring. So they are measuring how do I put this? Just the number of heart attacks. Yeah, and then they're going to compare that to the group that didn't have aspirin and see if the aspirin helped. All right, so question 2 is not asking you types of study. It's asking you if the conclusion is reasonable. Why or why not? So a particular study found a positive relationship. So positive relationship could be any kind of increase over time between the happiness of elderly people and the number of pets that they have. Okay. So therefore having more pets causes, now that's a big red flag right here, causes elderly people to be happier. So I don't think this was an experimental study. So you can't show cause without an experiment. I think this was an observational study or survey, and neither one of those can show cause and effect. All right, the only way that you can do that is an experiment. So I really highly doubt this is an experiment, because you can very easily just ask people how many pets they have and how happy they are. Yeah, so that's a really big one. If you see that word cause, just make sure that it is an experiment, okay? All right, question number 3. A researcher wants to find out whether higher levels of a certain drug given to experimental rats would decrease the time it took them to complete a maze to find food. Okay, so what he's trying to do is he's trying to establish a cause and effect relationship. If you take the drug, that's going to cause you to do better in a maze, okay? So why would he need to carry out an experiment? Because he wants to establish cause and effect. the drug company is going to want to go to people and say, hey, this drug is going to cause these, or eventually cause people to think better, to be able to go through a maze or solve problems quicker with this particular drug. So they have to use an experiment to establish the cause and effect. So describe an experiment that the researcher might carry out based on 30 comparable rats in 3 dosage levels, 0, 1, and 2. Well, this isn't really, that much in Algebra 2, but I'm going to go ahead and show you how it would work. All right, so first of all, you're going to want to randomly assign. You've got, 30? So we're going to assign 10 to each group. And you have groups 1, 2, and 3. So we say group 1, use a random number generator to select 10 out of the 30. So you would have 10 rats. Okay, and then group 2 would have another randomly selected 10 rats using the random number generator. And then group 3 would just be the leftover that haven't been called yet. And then, so you've got 3 groups. So your placebo group is going to be the 0 milligram. That's your control because they're not taking any medication. And then you've got the second group, 1 milligram. And the third group is 2 milligrams. So that would be a treatment 1. And then that would also be a treatment 2. And then what you would measure is obviously the time it takes for them to solve the maze. Okay, so we're done with the notes. Please take your time on your practice worksheet, and just, as always, just let me know if you have any questions.